Hey, I'm Dave Isaacs, and this week in Core Concepts, I want to talk about having big ears. And I probably don't need to clarify that I don't mean having prominent ears or large ears or Mickey Mouse ears or rabbit ears or whatever else. When I talk about having big ears, what I'm really referring to is how connected you are to what you're hearing. In other words, how much are you noticing about what's going on around you sonically? And how much does it determine what you play in response? And I will contend that the best musicians have big ears. The best musicians are good listeners. That should seem like an obvious thing, but I don't believe that it is, because over the years, I've worked with a lot of musicians who are very, very accomplished players, but not very good listeners. And that might lead you to ask the question, well, how does that even happen? Because how do you get to be a good musician without hearing what you're doing? And it's true that when you're playing, you certainly hear the notes you play. But what happens to a lot of people is they become focused in on their part, on the individual piece that they're adding to the whole, without actually listening for the whole, the totality of all the sounds together, and most specifically, how the part they're playing fits into that whole. Now, I've found myself in situations where there are 4 or 5 or 6 musicians on stage, all playing at once, and none of them listening to everybody else. And again, it sounds like a strange thing, but if you consider that it is really pretty easy to just get wrapped up in your own part. And let's face it, most musicians are invested in what we do, in the sense that when you play something, you want to feel good about it. And if you feel like it's good, if you're proud of it, then you're going to enjoy it. You're getting off on it. You want the audience to get off on it, and you want them to hear it. You want them to respond, to notice this thing that you just did that was so great. Fair enough. But you can't consider that it's great in a vacuum. You can't just say, here are the notes that I played, isn't this cool? Because you can't evaluate how well what you did works unless you're hearing how it fits into the big picture. And that's really a crucial idea. You always have a role as part of an ensemble, and even if you're playing alone, odds are that the parts you play as a soloist still fulfill some of these multiple roles. If I'm playing acoustic guitar, strumming, and singing along with it, I am essentially duetting with myself. There are 2 parts there. And even within the guitar part itself, there are elements to balance in terms of the dynamics of low notes versus high notes, and how much are the chords ringing, and how much groove are we feeling, and in what moments, and is the performance dynamic in the first place. So that's there whether you're playing with somebody else or not. And then when you're playing with other musicians, obviously it just compounds, because there are more and more things for you to react to and respond to. And I'm always kind of amazed by how often I notice people that are accomplished in their ability to play the guitar, but are not very good at following along, absorbing something, and understanding it enough that they can make a contribution to the whole. Now, you may not be in a situation where you're called upon to do anything like that, but that doesn't really matter necessarily, because no matter what you're doing, you have an obligation to yourself and to your audience to play musically, to put the music across in a way that's coherent, that's pleasing, that works, that feels right. And even though right can be a relative term, we can also say that you know when the music doesn't feel right. When things are, say, off balance, if you're not hearing one instrument, if another is dominating too much, if the singer is being drowned out, if the drummer is so heavy-handed on the cymbal that all you hear is pss, 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 instead of actually feeling the groove. You know when things are out of balance. And so this is the goal that you want to think about no matter what you're doing. You want your part to be balanced. You want to fit into the whole. You are one piece of the puzzle, even if you are creating the entire puzzle by yourself. And the single biggest thing to consider in looking at this is the dynamics. How strong is what you're playing relative to the other parts? And given where you are in the song, are you giving the appropriate amount of energy to that part? And so this applies whether you're playing alone or with others. Every song has a dynamic flow to it. It starts with a certain level of energy, and that energy might build and it might relax, but you're rarely hearing just the same ba, 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 no changing all the way through the song, no dynamics, nothing louder, nothing softer. That's not very musical. There are styles of music that have more dynamic variation than others, but even very aggressive driving music still has to have some dynamics to it in some way. Dance music obviously has a strong pulse that you're meant to feel all the way through it, but even so, the dynamic contrasts don't have to be dramatic. We're not talking about whisper to a scream here. I'm just talking about how certain lines of the vocal can be emphasized, how a lead guitar part can be more out front at one moment than another. Say a guitar solo versus fills in between vocal lines. Those two parts are going to be at different dynamics because they occupy different spaces in the whole, different roles within the blend of everything. Is your part front and center, or is it part of the texture? Is it meant to be a counterpoint to another melody, or is it really meant to be just a part of the overall sound in a way that you don't necessarily discern it? I had a band director when I was in high school tell me that the secret to good rhythm guitar was to be thoroughly present, but at the same time, barely noticeable. That you almost couldn't hear the part unless you listened for it closely, but if it wasn't there, that you'd leave a hole you could drive a truck through. Now that made a real impression on me. It was a colorful way to put it, but it makes a lot of sense. And the more I started to really look at particularly good rhythm guitar playing, the more I started to notice these things. That how you fit into the overall flow of the music is really, really crucial. And you can practice it all you want, but you still need to feel it and hear it in the moment. That's really essential. You can learn to go through the motions. I'm gonna get louder here, I'm gonna get softer here, but it's still, to really feel natural and organic and musical, it still needs to come from your interaction in real time with the sounds that are going on. Now, one other area that I find players get challenged is if people are playing lead guitar, particularly if they're learning to play lead guitar. I'm always more than a little disappointed when I hear somebody that's experienced fall into this trap. But I see this often, particularly at songwriter nights in Nashville, where you might have somebody on stage performing their song and somebody else on stage that wants to contribute some melody. Well, that's great. I mean, I love to do that. But I really try to be conscientious about it. I want to make sure I'm not stepping on the vocal line, so I don't want to play at the same time somebody is singing. I don't want to blow past changes in the song when I don't know what's coming, because I could go very wrong if what I was anticipating is not what happens. And I don't want to make it all about me through the whole song. I want to just contribute something musical to the overall effect. And the trap that I see people falling into is they start playing along right from the beginning before they've heard enough of the song to really know how it goes, which is really not wise. They haven't even heard a full verse yet, and they're already playing along, going all the way through. How do you anticipate what the changes are going to be? I like to listen through a verse and a chorus before I jump in and play anything. I can't predict what's going to happen next, but I can listen for when something is likely to happen. For example, noticing that we're coming to the end of a verse, and so that it's very possible something different is about to start. Knowing that we're coming into a chorus and I don't know what chord we're going to start on. So I'm going to wait to hear that new chord before I play something. If you understand something about songs and song structure, then you can anticipate when twists and turns are likely to happen. You can't anticipate them all, of course, but you can certainly pay attention enough that you're being sensitive to where you are in the song and recognizing when you're in a spot where there's a high likelihood that something else could happen and there might be a change you didn't anticipate. And in those settings, you hang back. You always want to look to contribute. It's always, and this is something people say about songwriting, it's a yes and. You're contributing something, but you're not overwhelming anything. It's not, now it's about me, which is never really the intent of anyone that's playing along like this. I don't think it's that selfish in their motivation. They just want to contribute. But if you're not paying attention, if you're not listening to what's going on around you, you're not contributing. It's that simple. There's a flip side to this. And this is something that I saw somebody post on Facebook one time, and I thought this was a great insight. And this is a songwriter who's an accomplished guitarist, and he said, if you're going to play along, make it count. Don't get up there and sort of quietly noodle through the whole song. That's not contributing anything, and it's just distracting to the performance. If you want to contribute something, pick your moment, and when it's time to step out and say it, step out and say it. Be authoritative. If you're not sure, there's an old saying, when in doubt, lay out. That's what having big ears really means. It's just a matter of paying attention. It's noticing what's going on around you. It's being actively engaged with what's happening around you. So you are always reacting and responding to the music, whether you are the source of all of it or one part among many. It's one of the most crucial ideas. If anything, it might be the most valuable lesson I ever learned as a musician. I love to play with other musicians. I love interacting with other people. It's one of my favorite things about playing music. And you can only do it well if you're a good listener. So grow those ears. I'll see you next week with the next edition of Core Concepts.